Okay, this lesson is on effects in Illustrator. Effects function in a way that you can manipulate objects where the program does a lot of the work for you. Places where effects are a good idea are things that are easier done by the machine versus done by hand. For example, we have sand here. You don't want to take the time to draw every single grain of sand individually. The program might have an effect in it that takes the place or emulates the texture of sand, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the filters in here. If we go into effect, you'll notice that we have a bunch of Illustrator effects and then some Photoshop effects. We've already played around with some of the effects such as blurring and drop shadows by this point, but I'm going to go through distort and transform and show you how to tweak the sides of an object. And then also I'm going to go and look at some of the artistic filters that are inside the program, okay? Now you can go in here and check out all of these and test, just kind of play around and see what these do. I'm just going to go over some of the ones that I think are the most helpful and that you might end up needing, okay? So the panels that you need are going to be window appearance, and we'll notice that my appearance palette is already up here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and select this item, and I'm going to go into the effects, and I'm going to go into distort and transform, and I'm going to choose roughen. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and select preview, make sure that's on, and you'll notice that if I adjust these, it'll change the size of those zigzaggy things that are happening here. And then if I do the detail, it'll increase the amount of these zigzaggies. And if I go into smooth, it'll kind of soften the edges slightly. If you go into corner, it'll make them a little bit more pokey. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and reduce these to something that I kind of like, and then I'm going to hit OK. All right. And now let's say that this is a little too harsh and you want it to be a little bit blurry, have a little bit of a glow on the ends or something. I'm going to go ahead and select it again. I'm going to go into effect, and I'm going to go into stylize, and I'm going to go into outer glow. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and select the preview, and you'll notice that it just kind of added this haze. Now you can go in here and change the settings, tweak the opacity in terms of how opaque that glow is around it, and then also change the amount of blur that you're getting there. Okay, I'm just going to leave it as it is, and I'm going to hit OK. You'll notice the two effects that I added to this object are now stored inside the appearance palette. If I wanted to go and modify them, I could just double click, like the roughen. I could go in here and then change this. I'm going to select preview so you can see. I could then change it if I didn't like what originally happened. Okay, and I'm going to hit OK. All right, same for the outer glow. I could go in here and tweak these. What's important is that if I want to change the outer glow, that I don't go and apply another outer glow under effects again. It's just that I modify the existing one, okay? All right, now I'm going to move on. Another place where you might find these effects useful would be, say, here in the sand. The ones that you would find useful in this case would be the artistic effects in Photoshop, and I just happen to know that one exists that would work well for sand. So I'm going to go into artistic, and I'm going to go into film grain here. Okay. Now, mind you, you could go into any one of these and it would take you to the same spot. So you would have access to all of those effects again in here. So you could play around and choose, and you can go ahead and go in here and experiment and see what you get. I just happen to know that film grain works for giving me this kind of sound effect. And if I choose grain and I move those settings, I can either increase it or decrease it. I'm going to kind of make it lighter. I want it to be a little bit more subdued. And then the highlight area, you're going to affect this area here in terms of how intense the highlight area is, okay? My intensity, depending on the image, it might give you something, it might not. This one doesn't happen to give me anything, okay? It's slightly doing something here, but it's not even noticeable where I could point it out very much. Okay, you might be able to see it a little bit. Okay, I'm going to hit OK. And now you'll notice that it makes more sense to do something like this to get the texture. I'm going to zoom in so you can see it a little bit better. To get the texture of sand than it would to go in here and manually try to draw all of these or use your symbol tool or anything like that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and zoom out. And now I'm going to look at this water here. Since I've applied some effect to some of these other objects, I'm going to try to see if there's any effects that I could apply to some of these other objects just to make it look a little bit more consistent. I'm going to select the water, and I'm going to go into effect, and I'm going to go into artistic again, and I happen to know that sponge might work for this, so I'm going to hit sponge, And again, I'm going to tweak the settings to my liking, and I'm going to increase the smoothness, and I'm going to drop the definition. Notice if I go up, it's going to be very intense. I don't want that. I just want kind of a subtle mark, and I'm going to hit OK. And now you'll notice that there's some texture here, okay? Now again, this might not be necessary. You might be able to achieve kind of the dark and the light, another method, you know, by drawing the actual shapes yourself. But since I'm using another effect here, I figured I might as well try to be consistent, which brings me to the warning about effects. Effects is one of those things that it's kind of like working with gradients or working with just solid colors. Once you start establishing one thing, then all of your other objects should try to follow suit so that they feel like they go well together in the composition. Okay, if one object is very well defined and looks very much like what it is because you managed to find the right texture in Illustrator, that's great. But when you compare it to other objects, if the other one's pale in comparison, then there's a problem. And the problem is that in Illustrator, you won't necessarily find textures for every single type of object that you have. So the key is to only use them when absolutely necessary. And if you can do the effect by hand as opposed to using the computer software and what's already there, then you want to opt for that instead, okay? All right, well, this concludes your lesson on effects. Go ahead and feel free to experiment further if you like. If you have any questions, ILED@hawaii.edu or 808-343-9565.